The Strait of Hormuz crisis of 2026 developed into one of the most serious global conflicts in recent history because of its direct impact on energy supply and international trade. This narrow waterway, located between Iran and Oman, is responsible for carrying nearly one-fifth of the world's oil and a significant portion of natural gas exports, making it extremely important for both developed and developing economies. The situation escalated dramatically on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes on Iran, targeting its military installations, nuclear facilities, and leadership structures, during which Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei was killed. This event triggered a powerful and immediate response from Iran, which launched missile and drone attacks against U.S. military bases in the Gulf region, Israeli cities, and allied infrastructure, signaling the beginning of a wider regional conflict. At the same time, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, issued strict warnings to all commercial vessels, declaring that no ships should pass through the Strait of Hormuz, effectively turning the region into a high-risk war zone. Although Iran did not formally declare a legal blockade, it implemented a practical shutdown of the strait through multiple aggressive tactics, including direct missile and drone strikes on oil tankers and cargo ships, the deployment of hidden naval mines, and electronic interference such as GPS jamming, which made navigation extremely dangerous and unreliable. These actions quickly created panic across the global shipping industry, causing maritime traffic to drop by around 70% within a short period and eventually fall to almost zero, with more than 150 ships stranded outside the strait waiting for safe passage. Major international shipping companies suspended their operations entirely due to the high risk and skyrocketing insurance costs, which made travel through the area economically and physically unfeasible. Within just the first 2 weeks of March, Iran carried out more than 20 confirmed attacks on commercial vessels, damaging several ships, forcing others to be abandoned, and resulting in casualties among crew members, which further intensified fear and uncertainty across global trade networks. In response to this growing crisis, the United States took a strong military stance, with President Donald Trump openly declaring the possibility of taking control of the strait to ensure the continuation of global trade and energy flow. On March 19, 2026, U.S. forces initiated military operations aimed at reopening the strait, including efforts to neutralize Iranian threats, clear naval mines, and protect commercial shipping routes. However, this move significantly increased tensions and raised the risk of a broader war involving multiple countries. The importance of the strait in global economics cannot be overstated, as approximately 20 million barrels of oil pass through it daily, supplying major economies such as China, India, and many European nations, and any disruption in this flow immediately affects global markets. As a result of the closure, oil prices surged rapidly, crossing 100 per barrel and reaching peaks around 126, marking one of the fastest and most severe increases in modern history. This sudden rise led to higher fuel prices, increased transportation costs, and widespread inflation, while also triggering an energy crisis in many parts of the world. The effects of the crisis extended beyond oil, impacting several key industries globally. Fertilizer supplies were disrupted due to reduced exports from the Gulf region, which is a major producer, leading to concerns about agricultural production and future food shortages. Aluminum production also suffered due to supply chain disruptions, and helium shortages began to emerge, affecting sectors such as healthcare and technology that rely on it. Global trade experienced major setbacks, as shipping routes were either closed or rerouted, forcing vessels to take longer paths around Africa, increasing both time and cost of transportation. Cruise ships and commercial vessels were stranded, and insurance premiums for ships operating in the region increased sharply, further discouraging maritime activity. Despite the general closure, Iran adopted a selective approach by allowing certain countries such as China, India, and Russia to pass through the strait, demonstrating that it was using the situation as a strategic and political tool to pressure its adversaries while maintaining relations with its allies. Bypass the Strait of Hormuz through alternative routes such as pipelines from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates or export routes through Turkey proved insufficient because these alternatives could only handle about half of the usual oil volume and were themselves vulnerable to attack. The international community responded with a mix of military and diplomatic strategies, with some countries considering naval escort missions to protect ships, while others pushed for negotiations and peaceful solutions through international organizations. However, global powers remain divided on how to address the crisis, and attempts to reach a unified response were largely unsuccessful. From a legal perspective, Iran's actions were widely criticized as a violation of international maritime law, as the strait is considered an international passage where all countries have the right to transit freely. Overall, the Strait of Hormuz crisis became one of the largest disruptions to global energy supply in history, significantly escalating tensions between the United States and Iran, destabilizing international trade and economic systems, and creating ongoing uncertainty about the possibility of a wider and more prolonged global conflict. As the crisis continued to unfold, its consequences became even more complex and far-reaching, affecting not only military and economic systems but also political stability across multiple regions. The ongoing disruption in the Strait of Hormuz forced many countries to urgently rethink their energy security strategies, as their heavy dependence on oil and gas flowing through this narrow passage was suddenly exposed as a major vulnerability. Countries in Asia, particularly large importers, began drawing from emergency oil reserves while simultaneously negotiating alternative supply agreements. But these measures were only temporary solutions and could not fully compensate for the reduced flow of energy resources. In Europe, rising natural gas prices created additional pressure on economies already dealing with inflation. While industries dependent on stable energy supplies faced production slowdowns and increased operational costs, at the same time, the military situation remained tense and unpredictable, as the United States expanded its naval presence in the region, deploying warships, surveillance systems, and air support to counter Iranian actions and secure limited shipping corridors. However, maintaining such operations proved extremely challenging due to the constant threat posed by Iranian asymmetric warfare tactics, including small attack boats, underwater mines, and drone strikes. Iran, on the other hand, continued to demonstrate its ability to control the situation without fully engaging in a conventional large-scale naval battle, instead relying on low-cost but highly disruptive methods that kept pressure on global shipping while avoiding direct full confrontation. This strategy allowed Iran to maintain leverage while minimizing its own risks, effectively turning the strait into a tool of geopolitical influence. Diplomatic efforts intensified as various countries attempted to mediate between the conflicting sides, but progress remained slow and uncertain due to deep mistrust and conflicting interests. Some nations advocated for immediate de-escalation and reopening of the strait through negotiations, while others supported stronger military measures to ensure freedom of navigation. The involvement of multiple global and regional powers made the situation more complicated, as alliances and rivalries influenced decision-making processes, preventing a unified international response. At the same time, global institutions struggled to enforce international law, highlighting the limitations of existing frameworks when faced with major power conflicts. Economically, the prolonged disruption began to reshape global trade patterns as companies and governments started investing in alternative routes, energy diversification, and strategic reserves to reduce dependence on vulnerable choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. Shipping companies adjusted their logistics networks, even though longer routes increased costs and delivery times, which were eventually passed on to consumers worldwide in the form of higher prices. Developing countries were particularly affected, as they lacked the financial capacity to absorb these shocks, leading to increased economic instability and, in some cases, social unrest due to rising fuel and food prices. The crisis also had significant environmental and humanitarian implications, as attacks on oil tankers and infrastructure raised the risk of oil spills and ecological damage in the Persian Gulf region. Additionally, seafarers and workers in the maritime industry faced heightened dangers, with many being stranded or exposed to life-threatening conditions. The psychological impact on global markets was equally important, as uncertainty and fear led to volatility in financial systems, affecting investments, stock markets, and currency stability across different countries. Over time, it became increasingly clear that the Strait of Hormuz crisis was not just a temporary disruption, but a turning point in global geopolitics, demonstrating how a single strategic location could influence the entire world economy and security environment. The situation emphasized the growing importance of energy independence, diversified supply chains, and international cooperation, while also revealing the risks associated with unresolved political tensions and military confrontations. As long as the conflict between the United States and Iran remained unresolved, the possibility of further escalation continued to pose a serious threat, not only to the Middle East region, but to global stability as a whole. As the crisis stretched further into the following weeks and months, its long-term strategic consequences began to reshape global power dynamics in a more permanent way. The continued instability around the Strait of Hormuz forced major world powers to reconsider not only their energy policies, but also their military doctrines and regional alliances. The United States, while attempting to maintain dominance over global sea routes, found itself engaged in a complex and costly operation where traditional naval superiority was challenged by unconventional tactics used by Iran. Instead of direct large-scale naval battles, Iran relied heavily on asymmetric warfare, small, fast-attack boats, drone swarms, coastal missile systems, and hidden mines, which proved highly effective in disrupting one of the world's most critical shipping lanes without requiring massive resources. This situation highlighted a major shift in modern warfare, where smaller or regionally focused powers could challenge global superpowers through strategic positioning and unconventional methods. The inability to quickly and safely reopen the strait demonstrated that even advanced militaries face limitations when operating in confined and high-risk environments. As a result, the U.S. had to carefully balance its actions to avoid triggering a full-scale war while still trying to protect global trade, leading to a prolonged state of controlled tension rather than decisive victory. At the same time, Iran strengthened its geopolitical leverage by using the crisis as a bargaining tool in international negotiations. By selectively allowing certain countries to pass through the strait while restricting others, Iran effectively created a system of economic and political influence, rewarding friendly nations and pressuring adversaries. This approach not only increased Iran's regional importance, but also encouraged some countries to adopt more neutral or balanced positions in order to secure access to energy supplies. In this way, the crisis indirectly reshaped diplomatic relationships and altered the global balance of power. Meanwhile, emerging powers such as China and India began playing a more active role in managing the situation, not necessarily through direct military involvement, but through strategic negotiations, economic agreements, and energy diplomacy. Their dependence on Middle Eastern energy resources pushed them to engage more deeply in regional stability efforts, marking a gradual shift toward a more multipolar world where influence is shared among several major players rather than dominated by a single superpower. This shift also created new forms of competition, as countries sought to secure long-term energy contracts and strengthen their presence in critical regions. The economic effects continued to evolve as industries and governments adapted to the new reality. High energy prices forced many countries to accelerate the transition toward renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, and nuclear power, as reliance on unstable fossil fuel supply chains became increasingly risky. At the same time, investments in strategic oil reserves, alternative pipelines, and new shipping routes increased significantly, as nations attempted to reduce their vulnerability to similar disruptions in the future. However, these transitions required time and resources, meaning that in the short term, the global economy remained under pressure from inflation, supply shortages, and reduced growth. Financial markets also experienced long-lasting volatility as investors reacted to ongoing uncertainty and geopolitical risks. Energy companies saw both gains and instability, while industries dependent on stable fuel prices, such as transportation, manufacturing, and agriculture, faced significant challenges. Governments were forced to introduce subsidies, price controls, and emergency policies to protect their populations from rising living costs, further straining national budgets. In addition, the crisis had a deep social and political impact within many countries. Rising fuel and food prices led to public dissatisfaction, protests, and increased pressure on governments to find quick solutions. In some regions, this contributed to political instability, highlighting how international conflicts can directly affect domestic conditions far beyond the battlefield. The situation also intensified debates about globalization, energy dependence, and national security, with many policymakers calling for greater self-sufficiency and resilience. From an environmental perspective, the ongoing military activities and attacks on oil infrastructure raised serious concerns about ecological damage in the Persian Gulf region. The risk of oil spills, water pollution, and harm to marine life increased significantly, adding another layer of long-term consequences to the crisis. Furthermore, the increased use of alternative and longer shipping routes contributed to higher carbon emissions, indirectly affecting global climate efforts. As the world continued to deal with the aftermath and ongoing risks of the crisis, it became clear that the events surrounding the Strait of Hormuz were not isolated, but part of a broader pattern of geopolitical competition, resource control, and strategic rivalry. The conflict demonstrated how interconnected the modern world is, where a disruption in one narrow waterway can trigger economic, political, and social effects across continents. It also reinforced the importance of diplomacy, conflict prevention, and international cooperation, as purely military solutions proved insufficient to resolve such a complex and high-stakes situation. Ultimately, the crisis underscored the fragile balance that maintains global stability and the serious consequences that can arise when that balance is disrupted. The current situation in the Strait of Hormuz remains highly sensitive and strategically critical due to ongoing geopolitical tensions, particularly involving Iran, United States, and regional Gulf states. This narrow passage, which connects the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea, continues to serve as one of the most vital choke points for global oil transportation, with a significant portion of the world's petroleum exports passing through it daily. In recent years, tensions have periodically escalated due to military posturing, naval patrols, sanctions, and occasional incidents involving oil tankers and drone surveillance, creating uncertainty in global energy markets. Iran has repeatedly signaled that it could disrupt shipping in response to external pressure, while the United States and its allies maintain a strong naval presence to ensure freedom of navigation. As of now, the situation remains stable but fragile, with no full-scale conflict, yet persistent risks of miscalculation or sudden escalation. Looking ahead, the future of the strait will largely depend on diplomatic developments, regional power dynamics, and global energy demands. If tensions ease through negotiations, stability and secure trade routes are likely to continue, but if rivalries intensify, even minor incidents could trigger disruptions, leading to spikes in oil prices and broader economic consequences worldwide.